Hi there, this is Anais Smit. Welcome to my channel on family law and mediation and related topics. Today I want to talk about the importance of having an ante-nuptial contract. So what is an ante-nuptial contract? It's a contract drafted between two parties, so obviously the prospective spouses. So this contract will be registered prior to the wedding. It's very difficult to do it afterwards, so you have to do it prior to the wedding. What is contained in the contract? You will either make a list of the properties that you have in your name prior to the contract, or you can list the value of your estate. Which means if something happens and you maybe um, get divorced or one of the spouses die, the first value when you entered the relationship will be deducted, and then the joint estate will be calculated after that. So you have two kinds of ante-nuptial contracts. The one is a contract with the accrual, which means prior to the marriage you have a certain amount, and then after the marriage, whatever is accumulated forms part of the joint estate. So if you get divorced, for example, that initial amount that you owed will be deducted from the joint estate, and then the joint estate will only be that part that has been accumulated after the wedding. So inflation is also applicable. So obviously the value of your property also increases, and that has to be taken into account if you would decide to get divorced at any point. Then you get without accrual, which means that whatever you bring into the marriage, you keep that. And then whatever assets you acquire during the period also remains in your separate estate. So each party keeps their own things. They don't share the joint estate unless they buy property together, and then the property will be on both parties' names. So how does having an ante-nuptial contract differ from a marriage in community of property? Well, in community of property means that all the properties that you had prior to the marriage and everything that you obtain after the marriage forms part of the joint estate. Which means if you were wealthy before the time and you now married somebody that didn't have any assets, and the two of you get divorced, all the assets will be divided in equal shares. But you will also be responsible for your spouse's debts if they occur any debts during the marriage. And even before, if they had a lot of debt, once you get married, everything gets shared between the parties, which is somewhat unfair. Also, with the in community of property, when one of the spouses dies, um, the whole estate gets put into one kitty. And if there are children from prior marriages, they will be entitled to half of the deceased spouse estate, or depending on how many children there are, it will be divided in equal shares. So it's also important to draft a will. So if you don't want to give anything to the children, then it's important to just draft a will to say that the long-living spouse gets everything, and then obviously once that person dies, then the children can each have their share. So if there is no will, the estate will be divided in two. So the living party will still be entitled to their half share, which will be deducted from the joint estate. And then the deceased party's estate will also be divided between the spouse and the children if there is no will. If there is a will, then obviously the deceased could have determined in the will to say that the living party gets everything. Okay, why is it important to have an ante-nuptial contract? If one spouse dies and you married in community of property, all the assets become frozen. So, which means that if that you won't have access to all the money in the joint estate, and that can leave people in quite a dire circumstances. So it's better to have your own bank account, and to always keep money separate from the joint estate. So that's if you have an ante-nuptial contract, your bank account will obviously not form part of the estate. And then when the other person dies, you'll still be able to continue um, administering your own finances while the deceased estate is being finalized. But if you own property in your own name prior to the marriage, and you have an ante-nuptial contract, your spouse will not be able to claim that property because you had it before the contract. Whereas with marriage in community of property, they will be entitled to half of everything. Also, with the ante-nuptial contract, you are not liable for your spouse's debts that was made during the marriage because the estates are kept separate. And then with the older people, I definitely recommend that you get an ante-nuptial contract, because a lot of times what happens is people get married, they have a good marriage, they've obtained a lot of assets, so it's quite a big estate. And then after the one spouse dies, the living spouse marries again, and then is squandered out of their estate. So you don't want to be scammed and become bankrupt. So it's very healthy for your own well-being to have an ante-nuptial contract. I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions, you can leave that in the comments, or you can go onto my Facebook page and send me a message, and I will respond as soon as I can.